Good morning everyone and welcome to another podcast. I'm fishing for salmon and sea trout today, so I've travelled much further north, still in England, but up on one of the northern English rivers, and on the back of some really high water as well, so there's a little bit of water coming down. Still quite peaty, but it's clear enough to fish. Obviously it's a lot bigger river to my trout and grayling fishing this. It's probably between kind of 40 and 70 feet across, maybe a bit less than that, maybe 30 to 60 feet. I fish here quite a lot, to be honest, and I've fished, this is my fifth I think trip this year. I've seen a fish or two, not hooked anything yet, so there's not a huge run of salmon on here. Sea trout better at night really than in the day, but you could still have a chance of picking a smaller one up in the day. I was hoping it was going to be a bit darker actually, it's quite bright. Hopefully we'll have a few clouds, but there's plenty of peaty stain in the water, so the water's still nice and dark, and that might just encourage a sea trout to take that would otherwise hold up. But there's only one way to find out, so I'm going to get in. It's coming down at a fair pace and the wading isn't the easiest here in places. I've got my 13-foot 10 weight and I've got the Rio Scandi head with an interchangeable tip. I've gone for a floating tip, but I've also put on a little 5-foot sinking poly leader just to help things dig in a little bit. And I'm just going to fish some of this fast water. There is another angler fishing below me, so I'm going to slowly work my way down there. And I'm starting off with barely a cast, just the leader, and just letting the leader run down some of these riffles. And then I'll slowly bring the line further and further out, start making bigger casts. But you want to search all the water close in first and then get the line out. It's a stunning piece of river, surrounded by meadows on one side and trees on the other. Lots of boulders in the river as well, which is great because it allows little resting points for the fish. And there are a couple of nice big holding pools I'm going to work through as well, where you will get some resident fish that will hold up. But what I'm really hoping for, I guess, is some fish actually running through the quicker water, or just resting up maybe in the tail end of a pool, having run up through the quick water. And I'll take anything today: salmon, sea trout, even a big brownie. I've had some big brown trout on the salmon flies out of here so far this year, so we'll just have to work down and see if anything wants to have a grab. There are some fish about. I know there was a few sea trout caught off here yesterday evening, and I know that there's been people have had salmon on and lost them over the past 2 or 3 days off the back of the high water, so there's a chance, albeit a small chance. And I'll give you a disclaimer, this podcast, that I'm only going to be recording for an hour here, maybe 2 at the most, but I'll probably fish for a good 8, even not 9 hours today, while the water conditions are favourable. So if I do connect with anything outside the podcast, I'll record a little extra bit at the end just to let you know how I got on. Right, I'm starting to work a bit of extra line out now, and I like to give my salmon fly a bit of movement. I like to give it a bit of a strip and a bit of movement. I know some people tend to fish quite static, but I like to get it moving. So this line from Rio has a separate running line and then a Scandi head, and then interchangeable tips. So it's pretty much a line for all occasions. Once you've got the tips, you can fish anything from a very heavy sink tip right down to the floating tips. So it's good for all but the biggest and deepest probably of spring rivers, where you may have to go with something that's going to get down a bit more. But just for day-to-day salmon fishing and sea trout fishing, it's a great line. Leader wise, nothing extravagant at all, very simple. I've got I have put on a 5-foot salmon poly leader of a sinking type just to help the fly dig in. And then I've just got about 10 foot of 15-pound Maxima chameleon. So very strong. I'm quite happy fishing a heavy leader like that because there's a lot of colour in the water. So, and then fly wise, I've got a size 12 silver hollow cascade. One of my favourite all round flies for salmon and sea trout. Cast wise, mainly on here I'm just going to be using a single spey, which is a cast that covers, for this particular piece of river, it'll cover pretty much every situation. Some places where it gets a little bit tighter, I might go for a snap tee, but although the sun's out, we're blessed with very little wind, so I should be able to maintain pretty much the same cast the whole of the run down today, which is nice because you kind of get into that nice casting rhythm and you want to stay with it really, if possible. But the fly seems to be swimming nicely. The line's getting out. I'm just about getting to my running line now, so I've been extending the line out every cast. I'm just about down to my running line, and this bit of water here, it's kind of a fast gradient, kind of in between pools really. I don't think it's produced much over the years, but I am heading down into a couple of nice kind of named salmon pools now. But there's always a chance in this high water of a fish actually running. It is high enough just for them to run through, so there is the chance of intercepting a fish in this quick water, or actually fish dropping back. So a fish that's attempted to run here got to some shallower water it doesn't fancy and is dropping back to the pool below. So it's worth, I think, fishing every inch today instead of just skipping around the pools, just in case there's something that's pushing through the quick water. I'm getting a good casting distance now. Flies coming around lovely, swinging round the tail of this quick water, and it looks like we're coming up to what's probably a very old weir of some description that's long gone, but there's some very fast water, and then it opens up into there's three or four really fairly good pools in succession. One of them is a relatively famous one, which has probably produced most of the fish on this river. Alright, so I'm probably just worked the best of these, the best of this quick water now. I'll maybe manage one more cast and then I'll have to just get into that fast stuff. Luckily, on this river, you don't need to wade deep for most of it. There's a couple of bits on some of the other beats where you need to wade, but it's nice, just edge of the river up to your ankles. Right then, let's head down a touch. So it's just narrowing a bit here, so there's a lot more speed in the river, some almost rapids really, but I'll still fish them again for that same reason of just in the off chance there's a fish trying to run up the quick water, because those fish can be quite grabby. So anyone that kind of knows me will know that salmon and sea trout fishing is pretty much one of my major passions. You don't catch many, but in terms of a buzz really, there's nothing like it. So these fast water here runs down the left hand side of the river, and on the right you can just see there's like just slower patches on the creases of the fast water. I'm definitely going to be running my fly down those, because again there's just areas there where a salmon that's attempting to run, or a sea trout, can just pause and get out the current and hold maybe for 5 minutes until it fancies running the quick water again. So just fishing those seams. For anyone that's really not familiar with salmon and sea trout, it's casting or fishing downstream with this outfit, so it's across the river in a spey cast and then kind of mending the fly a little bit, getting it to dig in, getting it into the right position, and then just letting that fly kind of travel down and swing round. And then I am giving it a strip as well, giving it some movement. It can come up and down a lot, this river. It rises in colours very quickly. I'm always keeping my eye on the gauge online and getting a bit twitchy when it seems to be getting into about the right levels for fish to be moving around. Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful day to be out. We've had so much rain recently. It's just a pause for a couple of days. It's just allowed this river just to drop off and lose a bit of its chocolatey colour. It's an interesting river. There's salmon, sea trout, brown trout, grayling, and then there's the odd pocket of chub and even barbel. I've picked up quite a few chub this year on the fly. Wouldn't be surprising if I pick another one up further down the river. They seem to be grabbing these orange cascades at the minute. They just seem to sit in the slower pools. So again, these fast water comes down the bank next to the meadow here, really quick. And then just to the right hand bank looking down, there's loads of woodland and over the river, and that tends to be the slower side. But in amongst the fast water, you've got loads of lovely boulders and little runs and hiding places for fish. Tufts of grass sticking out where that's grown up when the water's been lower. There's a few fallen trees, and it's interesting. It's a nice river with lots of different variations of flow and current. And I'm doing about one cast and then taking a pace or two. One cast, take a pace or two, covering this water fairly quick. So I don't want this podcast to turn into a bit of a downer about salmon numbers and things, but I think I'll probably mention it briefly. Anyone that does keep a track on this will know that Atlantic salmon numbers are really in decline at the minute. Very sad. There's lots of theories why, and there's lots of research gone on, but it seems to be anecdotally getting kind of worse every year. I just hope that the people can get to a point where they can find a solution to this and stabilise and then grow numbers. And I'm no expert, I'm not going to pretend to know what's causing it, and we've all got our own theories and we've all got our ideas. Likelihood is it's not just one thing, it's probably several things. Maybe some of those things are more contributory than others, but you know, it is sad to see. And if things keep going as they're going, you know, in 10 years' time, who knows where we'll be. There's a potential that runs in some rivers could collapse. I mean, the spring run in Scotland this year was atrocious. There's very, very few fish around, very few fish. So I think that's probably all I'll mention about it. Right, I'm just coming into the very, very, very top of one of the named pools here that's probably the most famous. I have actually just seen a fish jump further down. I think it was a little sea trout. It looked silvery and small. So there is another angler working his way down, so I'm just going to very slowly cast in a pace and work my way down. I'm not forgetting here to actually fish some of the water very close into the bank, because especially the sea trout, when they're running, when there's a bit of extra water, they can sometimes just move very close in, because that is the slow bit of river. So if they're just resting up or holding up, they're going to try really and find the path of least resistance, and sometimes that can be flush up to the bank. So it's just important not to be always hurling the fly right out to the other side of the river, putting a few shorter, more closer casts in, as well as swinging it round the pool. What I absolutely love about salmon in particular is just to think that these fish have been hatched in this river and then swum down into sea at some point when they were big enough, and travelled up towards the Faroe Islands or in the oceans around Greenland to feed, and then at some point they've made their way all the way back down the coast and back up the river to here. Just the thought of that happening fills me with wonder, really. And the sea trout as well obviously don't go out as far to feed, but they've still made their way to salt water, and then heading back up through the river. I think also it's the unknown. That's what I find so thrilling. So literally you can run down a pool with your fly and there's not a salmon or a sea trout to be seen, there's nothing, and then you can run down that same pool just 10 minutes later and there's a fish that's just moved up the fast water on its journey in from the sea. So you just don't know when or what, and it can just switch on suddenly, or there's a pod of fish comes through and you'll see the backs of them running. You'll see those fish kind of coming up the river and trying to get your fly in front of them. It's all that kind of stuff, and it's so scarce that it happens. So when it does happen, it's mind-blowing, really. I think that's what I just love about salmon and sea trout fishing. On the downside of it, it can cost you. It can cost you financially, and it can cost you in time, because you have to face it, most of the time that you come, you won't catch a thing. And often it's a journey, and sometimes accommodation, plus your fishing fleas, plus your gear. So you've got to take a hit financially and time-wise. And like I said at the beginning, I fully expect today not to catch anything. And that's the mindset, I think, of a salmon angler. I know that some anglers say every cast I expect to take, but I come fully expecting that I won't have a single fish. But I will enjoy the day. I enjoy the casting. I love the casting. Oh, it's so bright. So bright. I could just do without this sunshine. Anyway, I'm just coming into the very head now of probably one of the most famous pools on the river. It is a holding pool, which means that fish that have run up will take up station here and hold, well, indefinitely really, until they feel a bit more water to move their journey upstream. So there's always a chance in higher water, or in terms of sea trout overnight, that a fish has moved up here and is just taken up station in here. So I'm just starting to move into the pool now. The sun is so hot. Right then, so I've got a big steep bank on the other side with trees on it, and there's a fallen tree that's somewhere on the bank that's kind of made its way into the river as well. There's some ducks moseying around. The pool itself is probably only 40 feet across, but it's deep, and it doesn't really look it, but it's deep, and it will hold fish even in low water. You know, they'll find a spot here to rest. Ooh. I say the river is still quite coloured. I can just see the bottom probably about 1.5 foot down. I mean, there might be an argument had here to put on an intermediate tip or something that's going to get down a bit more, but I've decided to start with a floater. I guess the river is going to clear as well throughout the day. It's the most anglers I've seen out here all season, actually. A lot of the time I've had the river to myself. I think I've only seen one other angler fishing. It just shows you that the locals know that conditions are good and there's a chance. Right, let's get this fly out a bit more. There's a bit of cloud around, so I'm just hoping we get some over the sun just to drop that heat off. It's not too pleasant actually with that heat. Some light off the water. So I guess quite a few of podcast listeners may not be salmon anglers, so I might just mention, I often speak to people in the shop and talk about fishing and this. I'd love to have a go at salmon fishing, and it can be a bit of a minefield knowing where to start. I would invest in some, if you're going to have to fish with a double hander, and you don't always have to, so you could always fish with, in some rivers, a 9 or 10 foot 7 weight, maybe an 8 weight with a single-handed spey line, and you won't be able to hurl out huge sinking tips and great big copper tubes, but you could certainly fish, you know, doubles and maybe little intermediate tips and things. But if you are going to get into it and you fish with a double hander, the casting is very different to what you will have done with a trout rod, a single-handed rod. So I would definitely invest in a little bit of tuition just to get you off your feet with casting. And then probably, if you're lucky enough to live in an area where you've got a club water, I think joining a club is a good idea, because one of the things you'll find with salmon fishing is it's about hitting the river when the conditions are right. And even a river that has a small run of salmon, if the conditions are right, it does really pique your chances of encountering a fish. And then you can go onto a river that has what are, you know, classed as a bigger runs of salmon. If the conditions are terrible, you've got a fairly good chance of not hooking one. So it's a difficult one, but I think just booking a day 3 or 4 months ahead, and turning up on maybe something like the Tay or the D or the Spey or wherever, yes, you've always got a chance of a fish, but the conditions just aren't right. It's going to be difficult. So if you can, what I'm trying to get at is, if you can be a member of a club, then you can be watching the gauges at home, you can be chatting with other members, and you can just go when the conditions peak and put that time in when the water's really good, like kind of what I've done today, I guess. But, you know, I still book a day here or there and I'll travel and fish. And if you're happy just to go and have the experience, then, and take whatever weather or river conditions are there when you arrive, then that's fantastic. But get a bit of tuition, from a casting instructor who can help you get started with a double-handed rod and learn a little bit about the different lines, you know, the Scandi lines, full spey lines, Skagit lines, a little bit about the different tips we use, floating, intermediate, quick sinking tips, and leaders can be fairly simple. And flies, again, everyone has their favourites, and there's some great gillies who'll just say use the fly that you've got the most confidence in. Others will want to go through your fly box and select flies for the time of year or the water type. A lot of it's to do with water type. The big factor, the big factor in salmon fishing is water temperature and water height. So cold water, and the fish will be inclined to maybe hold up behind obstacles and not progress, or low water the same. So you want a good water temperature and a good water height. So often you want to be fishing on the back of a spate or a high river, you know, when there's been high water and it's just starting to fine off and clear, because that can really stir the fish up, really stir them up. And you'll get both running fish that will be happy to take a fly, but also you'll get resident fish that have maybe been in the pool for some time, that have, you know, got a bit stagnant and they've just settled down and they're not going to take anything. And all it takes is that extra push of water, and it gets their blood pumping, as it were. And or fresh fish moves into the pool and stirs up a resident fish, and it starts to get a bit grabby, and often that's when they'll take a fly. And if you really get into it, like me, you'll find yourself every day looking at river gauges online and rainfall and weather forecasts and planning trips around that. Right, so I'm into the good bit, the meat of this pool now. It moves it's not still, it still moves at a pace. I'm going to just work a longer cast out now because it's getting a bit wide. Let's get a bit more line off the reel. Right, just checking there's no one behind me coming down. So I'm about just getting towards, I don't know, getting to about 60-65% through this pool now. I'm coming up to the tail, and the tail of the pool as it speeds up can often be a good place, because below the tail of the pool there's loads of fast water, and fish will put on a spurt of energy to come through that fast water. And then just in the tail of the pool, a rock or two, and it'll just stay for maybe 5 or 10 minutes just to rest up from using all that energy. So swinging it around the tail can be fairly productive. I strip this one across quite quick. Right, get out there somewhere. Still moving down. I'm just coming to there's a big V in the middle of the river, which will be a boulder. I'm just going to make sure I get my fly through the V's and in front of the rocks that's causing the V's, all potential little hidey holes for a fish just resting. And then I won't be far off ready. Waiting stick, a cup of tea in it, a piece of cake or something, because I had an early start to travel up here this morning. The bottom of the river varies here. It's not too bad in this particular bit. But we've got everything from gravel through to, you know, kind of slippy bits of bedrock and big boulders. So this particular bit's quite an easy wade. But some of it's a bit interesting in terms of wading. You certainly need your stick. Right, let's keep pushing down. just like my trout fishing, I really have a preference for the fast water. I know it can maybe not be the most productive, but on the fly, I just love that quicker water. I don't mind this is like a medium pace, but I find it a real drag. There's one particular pool here where it's a very big, deep pool, and it's practically still, really. And it does hold fish, probably most of the year round. There'll be a salmon, and there'll be certainly a sea trout, probably or two there this time of year, but I just don't enjoy fishing them that much. You know, I just find it a bit of a drag, really. So I like to move, and I like to see the fly moving. I like it, the quick water and the way the fly kind of dances around. And just, this is nice. There's not so much still water on this beat. It's a lovely bit of fly water, actually. Still a couple of deep pockets here. So I'm right in the tail now. I'm just giving it a bit of movement as it comes round the tail. We can tempt something out from behind a rock. I'm going to let this one come right into the bank. It's just 2 or 3 feet out, and give it a bit of a strip. I'm just going to check my fly, actually. Just watching it cast then. It might just be my eyes, but it didn't quite seem to be travelling as I'd expect. Just check it's not wrapped around or anything like that. Right, I finished the tail, so I'm into the rapids, the very fast water. I'm going to fish it. Normally I'd leave it. I am going to fish it, just never know. Like I say, all it takes is one running fish and just your fly just to swing it, and it'll have a grab. So I'll fish through. I'll fish through quickly and then work my way down to the pool below, which I love. I love the pool below here. I don't think it accounts for many fish, but there's something about it that just screams fish. And I've had some nice brownies out of there while I've been salmon fishing as well. Wading's a bit precarious here. So this is my kind of water down. It's coming down in a real torrent. And then the torrent's basically right down the centre of the river, and then just to the right and left of this big fast bit of water you've got little flat pockets of calm, just little patches of river where you can see the currents not going as quick. And this is the water I love fishing, whether it's trout, salmon, sea trout, grayling, anything on the fly. I just love this kind of water. It always holds something. Sun's back out again now, which is disappointing. And the fly's just coming off the seam here, and I'm just going to give it a good pull there. Well, there's nothing in my favourite little pocket. I said most of the time I fish down there I have at least a pull from a fish, or I've had some brownies out of here, but nothing grabbing today. Just going to put some longer ones out into there's a bit of slack water over right across the far bank. I'll just try putting a few out into that and then giving it a pull through it. Right, so I've really finished my favourite little run there, and I'm now into some more very thin, rapidy type water. Again, I'm going to fish it, and then there's one more big pool further down, and I'll fish that through, and then it's a question of what to do really. I might just fish it all again, but this time on a intermediate or a sinking tip, or I might get in the car and drive up to one of the other bits of river, this park in the Anglers car park, and have a walk down there and see if I can. I think I'll probably fish it again while I'm here on a sinking tip, or probably an intermediate actually. But I couldn't fish the bit of water I'm fishing now on an intermediate tip. It'd be going around the rocks too much. So I like to start off on a floater really and explore every bit of river, and then I can sink down into some of the deeper pools second run through. This swinging. There's still, even in this white water, there's still little there's still plenty of boulders and little flat bits of water, and you could just imagine a little sea trout or a salmon working its way up this and just having a pause behind one of these boulders. It's all worth fishing, I think. I know there's the pools here which produce most of the fish, but you just don't know where there is one going to be. You know, you get an idea, but especially with running fish, they're moving, so you just need your fly in the water at the right time. But maybe an indication, I'd put my chances of a salmon today at 10%. I think on this river, hitting it right over 10 trips, if I got one fish I'd be happy. And it probably just gives you a little bit of an indication of the odds. I think there's probably a chance of a little sea trout. That might be a bit higher, you know, just a little, you know, couple 2 or 3 pounder maybe, or even smaller. And there's always a chance of one of them in the day having a grab, and there's a few about. Well, I've just fished down a long glide. Not so much as a tug really. I think I've hooked a bit of weed or something here. So I've got one more big pool. I'm going to fish the fast water. I've fished the tail of this glide, and I've got to I'll fish the fast water, fish this big pool, and then decide what to do. It's lovely here. There's now meadows on both sides, and a few cottages just high up on the hills looking down over the river, and the bridge going over the river, an old bridge below me, and the river just opens out again into a big riffle and boulders. Be lovely to fish with a nymph. I've actually brought the nymphing rod. I brought the Euro nymphing outfit because I might just have a little stab at that chance of a sea trout on the nymph, and in a bit after I've got tired of swinging stuff, I might just get that out for an hour. Okay, so it's now evening time, or early evening time. I'm back in the car with a bit of an update really. So I went down the river again, this time with the intermediate tip, different fly. It was still baking hot. It just didn't feel right. It was so hot and bright, and we weren't even getting little tugs from trout. Normally you'll have a pull or two from a trout. I think I had 2 little pulls, tiny little nips. It may be really, really small fish, or even tiny chub maybe. It just didn't feel fishy. So in the end, after that second run down, I stopped for a bit of lunch and then got in the car, and I thought I'll drive to one of the smaller beats of river. And the cloud kind of came over. It went a lot darker. And I actually got the little spay outfit out, little trout spay outfit out. Great little switch rod, and I put on a silver stoats and a teal blue and silver, and luckily after a few fishes down, I did get into some fish. So I had 2 lovely sea trout, and lost another sea trout as well during some acrobatics. And had a really good few pulls and nips on the fly as well. The sea trout were just holding up in the shade next to a woodland pool really, and it's slightly kind of medium paced, slightly deeper water. Just sat, and it just a case of putting a spay cast over, fairly long cast actually. A bit of a mend, getting the fly digging down, then a few strips, and that was just provoking them to come and make a grab. So really, really happy with the sea trout, and a wonderful finish to the day. So thank you so much for listening. As ever, if you are interested in guiding or fly fishing tuition, it's www.peaksflyfishing.com, and for our flies and tackle, it's shop.peaksflyfishing.com. And don't forget to call in to the shop if you're ever in Sheffield. Until next time, thanks for listening. Bye bye.